Jordan Peterson said, if you have a lot of kids, the likelihood of one of them becoming extremely narcissistic is pretty damn low because your siblings are going to make sure that you come back to earth. Because sibling rivalry is a real thing, and the reality check is going to be a constant loop that is going to keep you humble, teach you empathy, and help you learn how to share. And it made me wonder and it made me stop. We're having fewer kids now more than ever. And so birth rates are dropping pretty fast and in many places way below replacement level. And for those of you who are not sure, replacement level is a level that a society is going to reach to before it's able to come back to beyond to repair. But right now it's at beyond repair. And so I started wondering, could there be a hidden cost to that? Could having fewer kids be part of the reason why society in general is just becoming more narcissistic and exhibiting more narcissistic traits in society? Let's talk about it. Welcome to Pokes on Relationship. Here we speak everything relationships. And today, I'd like to speak about the relationship between a narcissistic society and fewer families. But before I do that, I wanted to share this clip with you. It was Jordan Peterson on the Modern Wisdom podcast, just speaking about family dynamics and how it plays itself out in society. And with social media, AI, and technology pretty much taking over everything that it means to be a human and in human spaces, I am wondering, could having more children actually be the solution to what I call the fourth industrial revolution? We're here, but I'll let you hear it from his mouth himself. Take a listen to what he had to say.
For very different words.
When you roll the clock forward, what you end up with is American children that then become adults who look around at the world and say, well, hang on, this wasn't what I was promised. I was told that I could be anything that I wanted to be. I was told that I could have anything that I wanted to have.
There's a difference between you can earn everything that is earnable and you deserve everything there is. So that message can become what you say, it can become misinterpreted in a narcissistic manner. And I think that has happened to some degree, especially as people have had fewer and fewer children. You know, Jonathan Haidt and Luke Yanoff talk about the coddling of the American mind, and they think about that in large part as a consequence of an ideological transformation. And some of that's true, but it's also useful to look at more fundamental phenomena. People have children when they're a lot older. They have way fewer children. They have way more resources when they have children on average. You know, if you're one kid of 8, you're pretty much battling it out for attention, for a very finite amount of parental attention with a lot of intense competition. And the probability that you're going to come out of that entitled and narcissistic is pretty damn low because your siblings will definitely punish you for that. But if you're the only child, especially of older parents who are also more conservative because of their age and also less willing to take chances with you because there's only one of you, and then you have a lot of resources at your disposal, well, that's a whole different developmental milieu. And we have no idea what the consequences of that are. But the idea that children in that circumstance are more likely to be overprotected and dependent and structured. It's like, well, yeah, undoubtedly. And, you know, that would even be an overabundance of parental virtue in some sense, right? Well, we just did nothing but pay attention to our child. Okay, but too much.
What did you expect? Yeah. It's so strange because I'm an only child, right?
And so before I even get to the conversation about the parts of only child, because from Modern Wisdom, he explains his dynamic at being an only child. But I think that Jordan Peterson's point is pretty straightforward. And I think I agree with him. And if you're somebody that you've actually grown up in a family with a lot of siblings, you can probably relate to some of the stuff that he's mentioning, right? Unless, and obviously, there's so many nuances and contexts to family dynamics. But I think generally the gist of what he's saying is something to think about. Because when you grow up with brothers and sisters, you do not become the center of the universe. Okay, you have to share toys, you have to share attention, space, everything. And if you act selfishly, entitled, bratty, definitely someone your size is going to call you out on it or definitely push back. And you experience that pretty much very early on in your childhood at home, whether you're the eldest or the youngest. And you know, that early constant feedback, that constant feedback loop, unbeknown to you, is actually teaching you things that parents can't actually teach. They can't always teach it to you just because parents have to go to work. You know, parents may be away from the home, but when you're growing up with siblings, you're around them a lot more. You play with them and they'll teach you that humility, that empathy, how to lose gracefully, how to negotiate, right? Because then, especially if you the youngest in a family of lots of children, you really have to become very strategic and intelligent in terms of how you negotiate to get your way, how to care about somebody else's feelings. All these things that we think that are not really issues actually play itself out in the type of human beings we end up having in society, in the type of adults that we end up having in society. And in a big family, you're forced to practice real human relationship from day one, literally from day one. If you're born and the older sibling is there, the older sibling has to learn how to share their attention now with your younger sibling. As you're the younger sibling coming up, you get told very quickly about picking orders, right? I mean, obviously it depends on your family, but generally that's just how it plays out. And according to Peterson, that makes it much harder for full-blown narcissistic traits to just take root, which I think I do agree with. But then let's have a conversation on the flip side. If you're an only child or if you have a very tiny nuclear family, I mean, and this also goes for nuclear family if you're an only child, but then perhaps you grew up with cousins, right? And so that also helps you develop that humility and have that constant feedback loop early on as a kid. Or maybe you were young, but then you ended up playing in sports teams. So you're forced to learn how to interact and integrate with other people from different backgrounds. But kids aren't doing that much anymore. Everybody's on their phones. Kids are not really outside playing. And whether we like it or not, well, clearly we can see that with that, the younger generation are definitely scoring a lot higher on the narcissistic traits test. But before I continue, I wanted to play Williamson's version of his experience being an only child and how that dynamic plays in how he interacts with just the world at large. And he also mentioned something, though, that being an only child didn't necessarily translate just because of the community around him being such an integral part of his upbringing. So let's have a listen.
And all of well, maybe my friends might say differently, but a lot of the commonly held presumptions around only children, I have a couple of friends who are as well. And I don't know whether it's where we're from, that the northeast of the UK is very spit and sawdust. It's salt of the earth people. It's, grab your bootstraps and your boots and start pulling.
Exactly.
And I just I haven't seen that. What is it through your clinical practice? Would there
This
common
might not be a primarily working class phenomena, the coddled mind phenomena. That could easily be a middle class and upper phenomena.
That's true.
Is there something, was there a common trend, or from your reading, have you found that only children tend to be one way or another?
No.
So you just get huge variance in them as well?
I don't know the answer to that at the level of individual psychological data. There might be a literature. I'm not aware of it. That, for me, that was more a response to Haidt's book on the coddled mind. I thought, okay, fair enough. Coddling of the American mind. What's driving this? It's not just ideas. It's a huge demographic switch. It's a huge transformation in the way we raise children. We're 10 years older when we have our children now. That's a lot older. When you're 18 and you have a kid, you're still a kid. And that there's some wildness that's perhaps not so good about that. But there's also perhaps a higher proclivity to go off and live your own life. And then, how much should your children be left on their own? Answer is as much as they can tolerate. And how much is that? Well, you find out with each child.
And so I thought that was a pretty interesting podcast to have that conversation. And also, I mean, this is not about shaming anyone who's an only child. Of course, I say that all these things and family dynamics is very context specific, also very cultural, right? There's certain cultures that are pretty different. But right now, my focus is really more on modern society and just what's happening right now with population decline, with the rise in loneliness and anxiety. And I'm also just trying to ask what is going on to just get to the bottom of this. And it might at this point, considering just things being very expensive for the average person, just people are not necessarily even considering family. But my radical idea is, what if actually the potential solution to the society that we're about to go into is actually just having more kids? There is some psychology that lines up with what Peterson is saying. Studies on only children, even kids in smaller families, sometimes do show slightly higher scores on certain narcissistic traits. I mean, and it's not a huge difference, but for me, I think it's substantial enough to notice. And I guess this is why, and he perfectly articulated, and I'm not going to really belabor the point and explain, but I did want to pull out these very important things. That number one, you have all this attention, and in parents' attempt to really give their children the best, sometimes it borders to just pretty much worshiping and idolizing your child, not intentionally, because I think it's good. I think it's good that you're able to have more resources and give your children more of that attention. But then but your energy levels also as an older parent isn't the same when you're young, and you might just let something slide. And all of that is literally a domino effect and has a ripple effect, because eventually those kids grow up and become adults. And then you have adults who just don't know how to be in relationships, just because for a very long time, there is a very much self-centered approach, and it's no fault of their own. I think more than anything, this conversation is really speaking more to parenting and the type of parents you have, because just because you have a smaller family doesn't mean that you can't start creating those boundaries in your children's life very early on in their upbringing. You set the boundaries so that children know that they can learn the empathy, they can learn how to share, especially if you have a smaller family. And so, I mean, there are many aspects to this conversation, but I did want to just reconsider if society should just start having big families again. Okay. I mean, yes, you might say resources, but AI is taking away a lot of the jobs right now. And there's a push for there to be 1 billion humanoid robots. And what are we going to do? We've got to build strong relationships as a form of resistance, as a form of survival. Because if we don't, we could potentially be extinct. Not to be an alarmist, but to be a realist, and so that we can also be strategic and know how to plan to move forward. I mean, outside of also just maybe having more siblings, right now, especially modern society, there are no peer group at home to say, hey, you're not the only one who matters, right? Social media, especially, constantly giving validation, comparison, curated perfection. We know posts are not always the best and real raw version of people. And even if it is, it's all for a purpose, to tell a story. It's never fully the full picture or the context. And so these platforms are even just exacerbating, further amplifying just this narcissism that is taking over society. But what happens when an entire society moves towards smaller families, fewer siblings, fewer people growing up with a daily reality check? I think more kids, through no fault of their own, may not get as much practice in humility, sharing, handling rejection early on. I think this point especially is important, because that is why a lot of the younger generation are struggling socially, because they don't know how to handle rejection. But life is tough. Life is tough. And there is absolutely no generation since the beginning of time and now that hasn't had to deal with some sort of difficulty or generation. every generation feels like theirs is the worst one, that the generation before them had it a little bit easier. But I must admit and say that I do think that previous generations, even if they survived very terrible natural disasters or wars or whatever it is, the community and the family structure that is still strong and that still stays as a bedrock of society is absolutely instrumental in keeping people normal, in keeping people strong, in keeping the society a solid one. And right now, that is eroding quite quickly. And more so with people just having fewer kids and people having to become more self centered. And we can see this in Europe, in European countries. All the European countries that are practically emptying out now, well, all societies that started tending and moving towards fewer and fewer and fewer children. And so I thought that was pretty interesting, but I think it's something that we should really look into as modern society. Right now, it might just seem pretty absurd to have that conversation just because people feel like they're barely afloat. But people also had lots of kids then and they didn't have much, but it just seems like they were more fulfilled. I know it might seem like it's a sweeping statement, but I think it's something really to consider. I think here's the good news. For me, when I focus and I start to really just see about what's going on in society, we're seeing more difficulty in people forming deep, lasting relationships, not just romantically, but even with family, friendships, even more so friendships, because we're seeing a lot of people commenting on Reddit that they feel alone, they feel odd, they don't feel that they're able to maintain friendships or that they give too much or don't even know how to set boundaries. And so this is a cause for concern. And I think it's, could smaller family sizes be one of the quiet pieces of this puzzle? One of the quiet pieces of this issue, of this loneliness epidemic. Definitely a conversation that we must have more aggressively now because of the introduction of AI chatbots, AI husbands, AI wives. People are not going to get married and have children at all. And so what is the world, what is society going to look like? But anyway, here's the good news. None of this, I believe, is destiny. It can always change. You don't need to have 5 siblings to learn humility, to learn how to interact with relationships. You just need intentional relationships. You just need to get into a sports club, get into activities that force you to interact with other people, sports teams, especially in this time, sports teams where people are not even going out that much anymore. But just choosing to be the kind of parent also that doesn't praise your children or worship them, allowing there to be healthy boundaries so that kids just don't grow up thinking that the world revolves around them. And of course, I don't think that Peterson is saying that everybody should go out and have 10 kids, although personally I don't find anything wrong with that. But he is saying, and which I do agree with, that the structures we build, especially early on in childhood, shape who we become. And just maybe, giving kids more chances to practice real life, messy connection early on is one of the simplest ways that we can rebuild a healthier society. As I say, we're messy as human beings. We're going to be reaching out for each other a lot more now. Elon Musk himself said that the most valuable spaces are going to become human spaces in this next dispensation. And if we're already not able to just interact with each other right now while AI hasn't completely taken over everything, I wonder how we'll be when we want to reach out for each other when we're all we have. Interesting conversation, interesting thoughts. What are your thoughts? What do you think? Did you grow up with a lot of siblings? How was that like? How did that dynamic affect your relationship with the outside world when you went to school, with friendships? Also, were you an only child? And if you were, do you agree? Do you disagree? How was that like for you when you didn't have that much interaction with kids around you? I'd love to know your thoughts. I'd like to hear what you think about this wild idea of having more kids to really solve society's problem right now. I appreciate you joining me. Next time, let's unpack more conversations about where society is going and the solution for that.